there's a lot more data on longevity, on health, on well-being. I say to myself, wow, so this is fantastic. Benefit finding really works. Being an optimist is good. And I have two questions then. Why isn't everyone optimistic? If we become happier, if we become healthier, why not? Why aren't we all optimistic? That's the first question. The second question is, all right, so I want to be more optimistic. How do I become that? So first of all, why aren't more people more optimistic? And second, how do I become more optimistic? I'm going to answer these two questions. Let me begin with the first. One of the main reasons why there aren't more people who are optimistic is that optimists are considered detached. And how do we know that? Well, or what leads to this sense of detachment, to the notion that optimists are detached? It's mostly the media. Because what do we see? We mostly see hatred. We mostly see bloodshed. We mostly see unhappiness. We see terrorism. And then when someone says, well, I'm optimistic, I think the world is a good place, that person, what are you, out of your mind? You're a detached Pollyanna. Just look at all the terrible things in the world. How can you be in such a world? How can you be optimistic? How can you be positive? How can you talk about joy and happiness and positive psychology in a world like this? You must be Pollyannish. In many ways, the message of Thomas Hobbes is correct. Life is short, brutish, nasty, and poor. And that seems much more likely to be true than an optimistic sense of life. Let's look at some of the headlines, and I got this just a couple of weeks ago as I was preparing for this particular lecture. So, Venezuela, a missing jet, flight delays, okay, this is the elections, fresh violence in Kosovo. So a new state was created, and there is violence, this is the focus. Hundreds of homes damaged by quake, and so on and so on. Turkey launches incursion into Iraq. Blood duel for Oscar. Okay, that's a good one, I guess. Yeah. Tory spelling dishes. Okay, let's move on. So that was CNN. Here is what was that? I forget which paper I got. I think this is Reuters. Iran nuclear question remains. Again, Turkey. Protest embassies, so on and so on, negativities. This is Fox News. What's the focus? This kid's mom wants out. A mother leaves her child. It's not focusing on the millions and billions of mothers who embrace their children. It's the mother who wants out. And then they tell why. What led the mother to want out of this relationship. And so on and so on. So much negative. How can we be positive in a world like this? It would be really unrealistic of us, wouldn't it? Well, I want to show you an excerpt now by my favorite psychologist, Ellen DeGeneres.
Watching the news the other day, brought to you by Paxil. Well, now I need it. Smart advertising. That's another thing. When I was a kid, the news was on once a day. You either caught it or you missed it. Now the news is on 24 hours a day. And that's not enough. They got a guy talking, and then there's a crawl down there. If you got that guy talking, you got the crawl going, you're online, you're putting in your opinion on your poll. No, I say to that, no! There should just be one crawl that goes around over and over again. Things are getting worse. That's all we need. And the local news, man, they want you to watch every broadcast they've got, don't they? It's not good enough you're watching the one you're watching. They do these teases to get you to watch later on. They're so incredibly cruel. It could be the most deadly thing in the world, and you may be having it for dinner. We'll tell you what it is tonight at 11. Is it peas? I feel sorry for the newscasters, you know. We can turn it off, but that's their job, and they have to read these stories, and they're just coming up on the teleprompter. They don't know what's coming up, and they've got to go through this range of emotions that there were no survivors. And next, which candy bar helps you lose weight? Still to come is an asteroid headed towards Earth. But first, where to find the cheesiest pizza in town? Also, a disturbing new study finds that studies are disturbing.
She really is one of the most brilliant psychologists I know, and we'll see a lot of her throughout the semester. Now, so the media does it. The media does focus to a great extent on the negative, and that's not just a bad thing. Because one of the roles of media in a civil society is to highlight wrongs that can be righted, to inspire people to act and to change, to make the world a better place. However, we need to realize that the media doesn't just report reality as it is. It highlights a certain aspect of reality, and there is a media bias involved. The media bias is not left-leaning CNN or Reuters versus right-leaning Fox and Wall Street Journal. That's not the bias I'm talking about. I'm talking about bias toward the negative. The media highlights the negative. It acts as a magnifying glass rather than as a looking glass. And we need to keep that in mind and to correct for that. The media doesn't just reflect reality as it is. Reality is not the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. That's not reality. That's highlighting a specific area of reality and magnifying it. It accentuates the negative, focuses on the negative, the war with Turkey, or the blood spilled in Kosovo, or the mom leaving her child, the hatred. And what he does when he does that is also underrepresent the positive. Now, if you think about it, this is exactly two of the three mental distortions that we talked about. Magnifying the negative, minimizing the positive. In other words, what the media does is distort our perception. It actually makes us into pessimists. Especially because the news is on 24 hours a day, and we're constantly bombarded by negativity after negativity after negativity. And where do we get the positive? 30 seconds at the end of the news. Oh yes, there is also a little bit of good stuff going on. But it's just to make you smile so that you come back tomorrow or the next hour for more bad news. Negativity after negativity after negativity, distorting, creating these cognitive distortions, these psychological traps that we talked about under cognitive therapy. And we become pessimists. Is it any wonder that most people are pessimists when the media has such an impact on us? And again, not to belittle the role of the media, but what I'm doing is highlighting certain aspects that we need to be cognizant of, that we need to counter. And how we counter, we'll talk about in a minute. So what does the media highlight? The frauds, Martha Stewart or Enron or WorldCom, highlighting these frauds, but not reporting on the millions and billions of honest transactions that take place every day, right now as we speak. Highlighting the negative, ignoring the positive. Millions and billions of honest transactions taking place all the time, all around us, constantly. Now, what else is happening? What we're doing, what the media is helping us to do, is extrapolate from a few instances where people want to hurt while ignoring the millions and billions of people who are dedicating their lives to helping spread happiness in the world. Whether it's in soup kitchens to help the world a better place, or whether it's right in our backyard, where over 1,800 Harvard students volunteer as part of Phillips Brooks House. Remember the false stereotypes that I talked about, whether it's here at Harvard or in the United States. So many people dedicate so much time to helping And yet the focus is on the few that hurt. And that creates a certain schema in our mind where we think the world must be a bad place. The focus is on terrorism primarily. But what about the millions and billions of people who want to live in peace? Again, this doesn't mean we need to ignore the terrorism or the bad or the negative. And this is one of the important roles of the media. At the same time, we shouldn't also ignore the good. The focus in the media is mostly on people hurting other people. For example, through rape, while ignoring the millions and billions of people who are making love every day. And not just in fairy tales. People all over the world, I've no idea who they are. I hope they're not in the classroom. There was Google image. And not just around the world, also right here in Harvard Yard. I don't know if they still have this survey, but the last one I found online was 2004. I don't know what happened since. Now, for those of you who don't believe that there are people also at Harvard right here who make love, here is proof positive, but some do. He's so cute. And the baby is adorable. Okay. Now, what I'm saying here is not that we need to ignore the bad, not that we need to ignore what's not working. We should focus on it, we should look at it, we should improve the world. At the same time, we should also understand that people who say to the optimist, to the benefit finder, get real, are actually missing the point. Because it's not the benefit finder who is detached. It's the fault finder who is. Because there is much more good in the world than bad. Much more. In fact, it's not just about focusing on the full half or the full half. It's focusing on the 90% because there is a lot more good than bad in our world. And it's important not just because it's a nice thing to do, not just because it makes us healthier and happier. It's important because focus creates reality. I mean, we saw it on so many levels. We saw it with the children on the bus that we didn't notice. We saw it when it came to Marva Collins, who said, let's focus on the seed of greatness in these individuals. We saw it with the research on resilience, when the focus was on why are so many failing versus what makes some individuals succeed despite unfavorable circumstances. Focus creates reality. Also, think about it. I mean, when we read about frauds and dishonesty in the newspaper constantly, what we begin to believe, what we naturally would begin to believe is, well, you want to be successful? You want to become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company like Enron? You have to engage in fraud. There is no real other way to succeed. Why? Because the millions of other people who are succeeding honestly are not reported on, or are mostly not reported on. And that's what we focus on. Not to say that it's not important to have whistleblowers and to talk about these things. It's equally important, though, to also focus on those who do it honestly and well, because they are the vast majority, way over 90%. Because if we don't, then a person will think, well, if I want to succeed in business, then I have to, bend the rules. And when an ethical decision comes up, when he or she becomes a manager at the age of 35, they say, well, the only way to succeed is if I bend the rules slightly. And that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Or how many people here, seriously, show of hands, once thought of going into politics, becoming, a governor or a president or prime minister? How many people here thought of going, other than me? Okay, quite a lot. I mean, we know that at Harvard there are quite a few. Now, out of those who put their hands up, how many people were told by others, you shouldn't go into politics, you're too honest? Too honest. You know, we hear it all the time, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because many honest people who could potentially make the world a better place by going into politics don't go in because politicians are crooks. Well, politicians are not crooks. Yes, there are politicians who are crooks, but they're the minority. The majority do honest work, want to make the world a better place, surely make mistakes, they're human after all, but with good intentions, with an ethical code. You know, it's a wonder that there is so much good in our world, while the focus is so much on the bad. It really is a wonder to me. It just shows how powerful human nature and how powerful the good part of our nature is, that we can sustain goodness. Also, how about this? The constant chatter in our mind is, okay, why didn't I do this? Why haven't I done the reading yet? Why haven't I completed my paper? Why did I say that to that person? Why did she say that back to me? Mostly negative chatter. How often do we have the chatter, wow, you know, I had a really lovely conversation today. Or, well, you know, I just finished so much work, I was productive, I did so well. Wow, I just got an A-, and I didn't even work that hard for it. I mean, how, of course, not here, but I'm saying other places. Why don't we have this kind of chatter in our mind? Again, because our schema focuses on the negative, and we'll talk about change next week, and we'll understand that there are actual neural pathways that have been created by the media, by the focus on what is not working, have been created so that we gravitate toward becoming fault finders. How we change that, we'll talk about that in a minute. It's important to focus on the good. You know what they said about Gandhi? That the most important thing that he did for his country was that he made India proud of itself. He made India proud of itself. That is so important to do. What about America? Are you proud of America? Do we, living here, or as Americans, the majority here, do you make America proud of itself? Because, you know, America has faults. It's not a perfect country. It has made mistakes from 1776, and it will continue to make mistakes hopefully for many years to come. But it's still, I would argue, the greatest country in the world. So many people want to come here, want to live here. Why? Because of the freedom, because of the opportunities. Again, not perfect, but a great country. Do we appreciate America? Do we appreciate its greatness? Because if we don't, we can pay a high price. This, you know, it's in vogue now, U.S. bashing. In this country, in this place. And the problem is when we just focus on bashing, when we just focus on the negative, we create a worse reality rather than improving the reality. So yes, we need to be critical, and one of the virtues of this great country is that you can stand out in the street or write an op-ed and criticize the politicians, the system, other people. It's one of the great contributions of this country, free speech. But at the same time, we also have the freedom, and we should exercise the freedom to focus on what is working, on the good. Because appreciating is important. Whether it's a country, whether it's a relationship, whether it's an individual, whether it's students, whether it's teachers, appreciation is important. The meaning of appreciate from the dictionary. Valuing, the act of recognizing the best in people or the world around us, affirming past and present strengths and potentials, to perceive those things that give life, health, vitality, excellence to living systems. So, the first meaning of appreciate is to say thank you, and that's a nice thing to do. But it's much more than just a nice thing to do, and we've talked about this before. The second meaning of appreciate is to increase in value. The economy appreciates, money in the bank appreciates. And that's an important meaning, because when we appreciate the good appreciates. When we appreciate the good in our lives, when we appreciate the good in other people, when we appreciate the good in our country, we get more of it. Unfortunately, the opposite is also the case. When we don't appreciate something, whether it's ourselves, whether it's our country, whether it's our relationship, the good depreciates. Remember, I talked about it in the past. Is it any wonder that so many relationships flounder, fail after the honeymoon phase? If the main question becomes, what's wrong, or how can we improve the relationship? And if we just ask this question, our focus becomes on what is not working, on the weaknesses, and we ignore the virtues, the strengths, the things that worked and are working. And when we don't focus on these things, they depreciate. As far as we are concerned, they don't exist, just like the children on the bus did not exist for you as far as you were concerned. What appreciating does is, in essence, create a growth spiral. Let me explain. Let me just give you a random example. Let's say Monday morning or Tuesday morning you're walking toward 1504 and suddenly you see a friend of yours. A friend of yours who you know is genuine, is real, someone you trust. And your friend looks at you and says, "Wow, you look fantastic." Now, how do you feel at that point? You feel fantastic. And you walk a little bit more upright, more proud, and you walk into the classroom just here, and another friend sees you and says, "Whoa, you look fantastic." And how do you feel at this point? Well, fantasticer. And then you come and you sit down here, and another friend whom you haven't seen for a month sees you, "Whoa, you look fantastic." And how do you feel at this point? Fantasticus. And so on and so on and so on. Made your day in an upward spiral. Now think about a slightly different scenario. You walk to 1504 on a Thursday morning, and suddenly a friend of yours whom you trust and value sees you and says, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" Now, there may have been nothing wrong before. There's a lot wrong now. And then you walk in the door and someone else is in and says, "Oh my Lord." And how do you feel? Well, you feel even worse. And you sit down and you see someone else who looks at you just completely shocked, and you're feeling worser and worsest, and so on and so on and so on in a downward spiral. Appreciation creates an upward spiral, and we know it's sometimes one sentence, one word at the beginning of the day, and you have a wonderful day or week. There's research showing how a single sentence very often can impact an entire life. This is work done by Bandura. A single sentence of appreciation can give us strength to go on. Now, the key here is that it has to be genuine appreciation. One of the things we'll talk about when we discuss self-esteem is how destructive and harmful ingenuine appreciation is. And now I'm not talking about, your boyfriend or girlfriend asks you, "So, how do I look?" having just come back from a date and worn something the whole night. You're not going to tell them, "Well, actually awful." So, okay, we're not talking about these gray areas, but it has to be real. It has to be connected to reality, and we'll talk about that much more when we talk about self-esteem. The key, though, is that we need to understand that there is always something real to appreciate. Think about the studies with the cancer patients or AIDS patients. Even they were able to find something good in a very difficult, tragic situation. And when they appreciate the good, when they find the benefit in that situation, the good appreciates. It grows. Oprah, a real benefit finder. What you focus on expands. And when you focus on the goodness in your life, you create more of it. Opportunities, relationships, even money flowed my way when I learned to be grateful no matter what happened in my life. Because what we focus on appreciates. Again, the metaphor that I've been talking about throughout the course, the seed. What happens to a seed if we don't water it, if we don't shed light on it? What happens to that seed is that it withers and dies, and that unfortunately is the fate of most human potential, most relationship potential, most countries. And if we want it to grow, if we want it to blossom, we have to shed light on it we have to water it. This is exactly what Marva Collins did with the seed of greatness that existed in every one of her students. This is what the Pygmalion in the classroom experiment showed, was that when teachers were made to focus on the potential in those individuals who were deemed fast spurters, when they were made to focus on it, to shed light on, when light was shed on their potential, that's when the children grew. That's when they fulfilled much more of their potential. So how do we correct the false schema? What do we do about it? Let me share with you some things on the societal level, some things on the individual level. On the societal level, create good news. Not enough of it around. Now people say, well, it's not marketable, it's boring. Well, okay, a lot of it is not marketable. Part of it because it's the norm, it's the usual. But why not report on the great technical advances that are making lives better? Why not report much more on the great medical advances? Why not report much more on peace and well-being? You know, a situation stops being interesting once there is peace. It's interesting when there's war. Well, why not focus more on these areas? Here is a newspaper that was started online, the Good News Network, that I highly recommend you go on to. Just in the last couple of years it was started. Getting people to focus on what is working. You know, about Albert Einstein, about Cambodia gaining independence on that day in 53. Berlin Wall. You know, focusing, reminding ourselves of historical good as well as on present good. And they have great news where they talk about. Gmundo, another, I don't even know what that means, but another online newspaper that focuses on things that work. Why not start the day with that as well, in addition to opening the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times? Looking at that as well, just to counter the negative schema. Art, so important in creating a better world, in changing our internal schema. I mean, look at the light in Vermeer's Renaissance artist in his picture. A light during a time where there was not much light. I mean, consider the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. But the artists focused on what is working, on the light, on the human potential, and paved the way to the Renaissance. It all started with art. Or the 17th, 18th and 19th century romantics. Beethoven or Victor Hugo, they encountered a harsh reality, but they focused also on the heroic, on the great, on the human potential. Aristotle once said that fiction is more important than history, because history depicts life as it is, whereas fiction depicts life as it can and ought to be. As it can and ought to be. The human potential, and that paved the way to much higher levels of freedom and equality in the world. In 1930s America, in many ways the heyday of Hollywood, where directors like Cukor, Capra, Sturgis created masterworks during a time when there was a Great Depression, and people used to go to the cinema and watch these films to inspire them and help them get through the difficult time. It was also between the two, the Great War and the Second World War. Difficult time in the world. World recovering and then plunging into another war. And yet the artists continued to inspire. Not ignoring what is not working. Not ignoring, but improving. That, by the way, is my favorite movie, Sullivan's Travels. Modern art as well. Wouldn't it be lovely if we go into a gallery and we feel inspired by the art, whether it's by photography, whether it's by sculpting, whether it's by movies or books. There has to be much more of it. And again, one of the roles of the artist is also to highlight what's not working so that it is improved. But if an artist if an individual is really concerned about improving the good in the world, it is not enough to only focus and highlight what is not working. Because if we don't highlight the good, if we don't appreciate the good as well, the good depreciates. Positive psychology. This is what it is very much about. Remember, there are two things that positive psychologists do when they study. The first thing that they do is focus on what works. The second thing that they do is focusing on the extraordinary, on the tip of the stem. And by doing that, in the words of Miriam, they democratize excellence. Because they're focusing on the good, not ignoring what works in each individual, not ignoring the extraordinary individuals. The Marva Collins of the world, the resilient kids in at-risk population, and so on. Another reason, in addition to the media, why we tend to ignore the good and focus mostly on the bad is that we adapt. We adapt to what is common, and what drives us, what's interesting to us, is the uncommon, the exception, rather than the rule. And because there is so much more good in the world, so much more common, we adapt to it. We stop seeing it after a while. Whereas the bad, the exception, always captures our attention. Why? Because nature created us such that we are change detectors. We're change detectors, and whenever there is a change, our mind immediately goes to that change. Something different that happens. Whether it's something we see or something we hear. For those of you who were asleep. So it's the exception that wakes us up, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that nature was created that way, because it helps us in case of danger. Because it helps us, for example, hear when there is a lion coming toward us, or trying to creep up toward us. It helps us smell poison, something that is different, that changed. It also helps us hear a sleeping baby. It's incredible how this works. Fast asleep, there can, the house may be falling, you don't get up, but then there is a baby crying, and you're up in a second. We're change detectors, and nature has created us such, or God has created us such, so that we can survive better. Now, it's actually a good thing that we adapt on a few levels. First of all, if we didn't adapt, if we were hearing all the noises, we would quite literally go nuts. Because there are so many noises right now going on, in addition to what you're listening to. People typing, people breathing, once in a while car from the outside, and would go crazy if we were always attuned to everything that was going on. So it's good that we adapt. That's why people can live literally on a highway and still fall asleep at night. Because after a month or so, they stop hearing the cars there. It's like we have relatives out in Concord who live quite literally on top of the train. And we went to visit them for dinner, and a train passes by, and the house shakes, and it's enormous noise. And at the beginning, Tommy and I looked at each other and and smiled. And then second time the train goes by, and the house shakes, and huge noise. And I couldn't help myself, and I said, "Doesn't that bother you?" And they said, "What?" Did you know what I was talking? I said, "The train just passed." And they said, "Oh, we don't notice it anymore." Why? Because it passes every half hour or every 20 minutes. They don't notice it. So it's a good thing that we can adapt. Also in terms of difficulties. Personally, the most difficult experience that I endured was on the 19th of September, 19th of December, 1997. I was living in Singapore at the time. My best friend was coming over from Indonesia to visit me. The person who was most important in the world to me at that time. And her plane crashed. Silk Air Flight MI-185. Some of you may remember this. And my world crumbled. For the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't want to go on anymore. I had no energy. And I called up my family, and then I called up another person who has made a lot of difference in my life, Nathaniel Branden. For various reasons. First of all, Nathaniel Branden he's a well-known author and psychologist, had just visited Singapore, had just met Bonnie. And I called him up because he was a psychologist whom I thought could help me, but also because at the age of 45 he lost his wife, who drowned in a pool when she had an epileptic fit, and he found her drowned when he came back home in their pool in their home. So he had been through that about 25 years earlier. So I wanted to talk to him to get his advice, and I was on the phone and could hardly get my words across. I was crying constantly, and he said to me, "Tal, what I'm going to tell you now is not going to make sense, but it's true. You're going to get over this. I know you are. We get over losses. It's difficult. It's painful. Cry. Give the emotions their space. But you're going to get over it. We get over painful emotions. We all do, because if we hadn't, then God help us all. Because if we hadn't, then God help us all." And it took a long time. It was after 3 months that I could start working again. It took a whole year for me to feel some of the bounce, some of the passion for life that I felt before. But now I think about Bonnie, and I smile wistfully, sadly, but I can also appreciate the good times that we had together and the privilege that I had of meeting her. We adapt, and that's a good thing. That's an important thing, because God help us all if we hadn't. There is another side, though, to that equation. There is another side. When we adapt, we also take things for granted. And that's not a good thing. Because we take for granted our family that we care about so much. And we take for granted our friends. And we take for granted the food that we're about to have in the dining hall that's served to us. What a luxury. And we take for granted the person who is sitting next to us. And we take for granted the classes that we take here, because we adapt. And it's a good thing when it comes to the negative. It's not such a good thing when we take life for granted. And the question that we need to ask is it possible to have it all? Is it possible to adapt to the negatives, but at the same time not to adapt as much to the positives? You know, there's a story in the Jewish tradition about a man who was living in one of the shtetls, one of the villages in Eastern Europe, and he really had it bad. I mean, he was living in a tiny home with many kids and with a wife who was constantly nagging him. They were constantly fighting, and they're really terrible. And that man wanted to improve his lot, so he went to the rabbi and recounted to him how terrible his life is. He said, "Look, we're living in a small home. The kids are all over. No privacy whatsoever. My wife nags constantly. Rabbi, help." So the rabbi said, "In your yard, do you have chicken?" So he said, "Yes, we have chicken." "For the next week, bring the chicken into your home." "But Rabbi, what are you talking about? We have no place." "Bring the chicken into your home." The person was a devout man, believed in his rabbi, brought the chicken for the whole week in the home. Feathers, dirt, stinks, you name it. The kids continue to fight even more. The wife nags even more. "What are you doing to us here? Our house is small as it is." The rabbi said, and they continue to fight and bicker, and the week finally ends, and he runs to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, help." And the rabbi says, "How are things going?" He said, "Well, worse. no place at home, we're fighting, it stinks, it's terrible. My child, do you have a cow in your backyard? Yes, Rabbi, we have a cow. Well, bring her into the house in addition to the chickens for the week. Rabbi, just do it. So he brings in the cow, and again, it's awful, and it stinks to the nth degree, and and they don't even sleep for the whole week, and it's terrible, and by the end of the week, he's looking terrible, disheveled, he stinks. He goes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, help, situation is terrible. Yes, it's so much worse. Do you have a horse in your backyard? Yes, Rabbi, we do. By now understanding the pattern here, take the horse and bring it into your house. So he takes the horse, brings it into the house, and it's awful. The horse is kicking and yelling and jumping and breaks stuff, and there is mess and chaos and bickering and so much worse. And finally the week ends. He runs to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, how are you doing? Rabbi, it's terrible, it's awful. Okay, for the next week, why don't you take out all the animals and come and see me then? And at the end of the week, he comes there and the rabbi says, how are things going? Rabbi, it's wonderful. We have so much place. The smell is so good. We're getting along now like we hadn't ever before. The kids are happy. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Now here is the question. Do things need to get worse before we appreciate what's right in front of us and all around us? When do we begin to appreciate our health? When do we begin to appreciate our health? When something goes wrong with us or with someone else. When do we begin to appreciate life? When ours is in danger or when we lose someone dear to us. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, must something external, extraordinary, and usually tragic happen for us to appreciate the ordinary? You see, there are treasures of happiness all around us and within us. Right next to us, in the dining hall, sitting next to you here, in your room, at home. There are wonderful things worthy of appreciation all around us and within us. But we take them for granted. And do we need to wait? Do we need to wait for that? And the answer is no. No, if we learn gratitude as a way of life. If we cultivate the habit of gratitude. And just as the media has cultivated the fault finding, we can cultivate benefit finding. We can cultivate grateful, because when we're grateful for something, we no longer take it for granted. G.K. Chesterton, you say grace before meals. All right, but I say grace before the concert and the opera, and grace before the play and pantomime, and grace before I open a book, and grace before sketching, painting, swimming, fencing, boxing, walking, playing, dancing, and grace before I dip the pen in the ink. Gratitude produced the most purely joyful moments that have been known to man. Think about it. Think about the last time you were grateful to someone and you expressed that gratitude. How did you feel, and how did you make that other person feel? Or when someone was grateful to you, appreciated you, you were walking on air. It created this upward spiral as a result. When it's genuine, when it's real. We don't do enough of it. We don't do enough appreciation. We don't express gratitude enough. Whether it's to the food that we eat, whether it's to writing that we do, whether it's for our friends or family. This is one of the most wonderful books written about the power of gratitude. It's not a research book, but a lot of these ideas, and as I'll talk about in a minute, have been researched. About Gratitude by Brother David Steindl Rast. He also has a great website if you Google his name. How do we cultivate gratitude? His advice is simple and gracious. Why not start by surveying a typical day? What is it you tend to tackle with spontaneous mindfulness, so that without an effort, your whole heart is in it? Maybe it's the first cup of coffee in the morning, the way it warms you and wakes you up, or taking your dog for a walk, or giving a little child a piggyback ride. It is a matter of practice. of doing it over and over again till it becomes second nature, till it becomes a habit, till we take a state of gratitude and turn it into a gratitude trait. And it is possible to do it. One of the ways to do it is to identify every day just one or two things to do mindfully, to focus on them. Whether it's the first cup of coffee in the dining hall, whether it's the walk to class, whether it's 10 minutes in the afternoon where you just listen to the music in your room by yourself with your eyes closed and focused, appreciating your favorite piece. Taking our time to not just become wine connoisseurs, but also life connoisseurs. This course in many ways is about life appreciation. He continues, gratefulness is the measure of our aliveness. Are we not dead to whatever we take for granted? Surely to be numb is to be dead. Think about this. So Irvin Yalom, Stanford psychiatrist, did a lot of research on terminally ill patients. He went to people who had 3 months, 6 months, up to a year to live, and researched this population. And what he found time and again is that these people, time and again, were saying something to the effect of, for the first time in my life, I feel that I'm alive. For the first time in my life, I feel that I'm alive. Why? Because for the first time, I appreciate breathing. For the first time in many years, I appreciate my husband, my wife, my friend, my children, a flower, the grass, a conversation. For the first time of my life, I appreciate it. Whereas before, the focus was just not there. It was on other things, on the difficulties and the hardships, and mostly on the negative. And remember, as far as you're concerned, the children on the bus did not exist. As far as most people are concerned, the good things in their lives, in their relationships, do not exist. Because when we're not grateful for them, when we take them for granted, as far as we're concerned, they're not there. And then we're numb to these things. We're dead to these things. And it takes a wake-up call, like a terminal disease, to wake us up, to get us to focus on what is right inside us and all around us all the time. Why? Why wait? Why wait?